To Hamish De Bretton Gordon, former commanding officer of the UK's Chemical, Biological, Radiological and Nuclear Regiment. Hello, Hamish. Thanks very much for coming on.
Hi, good afternoon, Rick.
So the rhetoric around this has been so high. How safe is this site at the moment?
Well, absolutely. And it's very good that people are discussing it. When it comes to the safety, as I think anybody can imagine, fighting around a nuclear power station is absolutely bonkers. Although Zaporizhzhia is very well constructed and constructed to actually be able to take a hit from a crashing aeroplane or missiles. It's not designed to be fought around. There are many hazards apart from the reactors themselves potentially melting down to create, an explosion as what we saw at Chernobyl only a few hundred miles away from here. And of course, that contamination reached the UK and parts of Wales were contaminated for over 10 years. Outside of the reactors, there is spent fuel and other contaminated areas which could potentially catch fire and create contamination in the local area. But the bottom line is it appears that Russia is wanting to weaponize Zaporizhzhia, creating a sort of a type of nuclear device. And if all 6 reactors did blow up, and the Russians have claimed that they've wired them for explosives, but I think that is more bravado than reality. But if they did blow it up, there would be huge amounts of contamination. And the meteorological data released yesterday, or maybe the day before in Ukraine, shows that all that contamination come our way. So it is an incredibly dangerous situation. And particularly Putin is using it as a way to get at Ukraine. So as you said at the start of this piece, the fact that President Macron and Putin have agreed that international inspectors can go there is a good step. But we know that Putin is not the most honest person in the world. Well, and let's hope this happens because
it's quite an incredible threat to make. Now, what is the significance of this movement then, Hamish? What will an inspection by UN officials be able to achieve? And do we think the Russians are genuine about letting them in?
Well, first of all, to your first point, what will it achieve? We don't know the state of the power station. The Russians took it over in March, soon after they invaded Ukraine, and have been running it with Ukrainian atomic workers, almost at gunpoint. We don't know what safety's been cut. We don't know what shortcuts they've taken. And, nuclear power is not something you mess around with. It can be incredibly safe. And in my opinion, it's the answer to climate change. But when you weaponize it in some improvised nuclear device, can be terribly desperate. So checking on the state of the plant itself is the number one thing. The second thing, of course, is if we get inspectors in there, one hopes that not even the Russians would try and do something while they're there. Antonio Guterres, head of the UN, has called for a demilitarized zone around Zaporizhzhia, which I absolutely agree with. We need to take Zaporizhzhia out of the fight, as it were, so that it cannot be weaponized. So that is the other thing. How likely is this to happen? Well, I personally would not trust Putin as far as I can throw him, and that wouldn't be very far. I think it's very important that international leaders like Macron really hold Putin's feet to the fire here. A lot have been silent over the summer. Let's hope they get back from their holidays pretty soon and join other leaders to put the pressure back on Putin, get these inspectors into Zaporizhzhia, and most importantly, try and find some way to peace in Ukraine.
You mentioned that the nuclear power plant is designed to take a hit of an aircraft crash. But how dangerous could it be if a plant was struck accidentally in a different way?
Well, I mean, there are a couple of things here. If it was accidentally struck by an artillery shell or a missile, it should resist it. But, these are shoulds and ifs and possiblies, which, this is not the sort of thing we want to be talking about because the amount of radiation that could come out here. And the other key point, and I agree with Tobias Ellwood, the head of the chair of the Defence Committee, that actually, if Russia deliberately caused an accident or blew up Zaporizhzhia, all the contamination is going to fall in NATO countries, and that could be seen as an Article 5 event and could trigger NATO's direct involvement in Ukraine, which would be absolute disaster. So they should resist these sort of things. However, I think the most dangerous element is if the Russians have actually put explosives inside the reactor, so they blow it up from within. That would be an absolute disaster. The Russians have claimed they've done it. I think there's no confirmation, but of course, those inspectors, when they go on the ground, they will be able to find out for sure.
Hamish, as someone who's worked very intensively in this area, how do you see the current state of the plant in how it's functioning to provide power?
Well, my expertise is very much in the sort of defense and prevention of nuclear accidents and attacks. The actual running of the plant, I can only really guess at. The fact that only 2 of the reactors are working out of 6, I think, is a bit of an indicator that, you know, they're on very short manning and doing what they can. There are some rumors today that the Russians have actually turned off the power coming out of Zaporizhzhia. If they do that, that is incredibly dangerous. Not only if they lose power, particularly to the cooling system, you know, that can have a dramatic effect with fuel rods melting down and catching fire. And the other thing, of course, is that Ukraine relies for about 20% of its power from Zaporizhzhia.
Right.
And if the Russians turn that off, that ups the ante yet again.
20% of its power, which is a lot coming out of that plant with just 2 of the reactors working. Now, can you kind of paint me a picture of what the security issues would normally be surrounding a nuclear power plant and what the current situation you believe is on the ground now in Zaporizhzhia?
Well, no, in normal times, you know, in this country or any other country that has nuclear power stations, security is a very top issue. One wants to make absolutely sure that those people working in the nuclear power industry are completely vetted, to make sure that people can't get in there and create events and accidents. So security is pretty high. Now, before the war in Ukraine, I'm sure the security at Zaporizhzhia was very high. Of course, now it's in a war zone. I mean, as we hear every day, there are bombs and bullets, you know, whistling through the towers at Zaporizhzhia. Now, that is not what these places are designed for, or ever conceived that this would happen. And, you know, nuclear power stations like churches, like mosques, like synagogues are protected under the Geneva Convention, which is absolutely as they should be. However, the Russians seem to have a complete disregard for the rules of war in the Geneva Convention. So what is happening in Zaporizhzhia at the moment, and has been happening, is, as I think I said at the beginning, without wanting to sound trite, is absolutely bonkers. No sane person would act like this. And I think this is something of great concern, you know, for NATO and those people who are trying to find a peace in Ukraine, because not only is Putin creating a sort of improvised nuclear device here, he's also threatened us and the Ukrainians with nuclear weapons. And a final piece here is Soviet doctrine allows local commanders to use tactical or smaller nuclear weapons to stave off defeat. And, you know, in some parts of Ukraine, and looking at what's happening in Crimea, you know, we are getting to that position. So things are getting even more tense than they were. But if we can get international inspectors in there quickly, then hopefully that might de-escalate this a little bit.
Hamish, thank you.